on the front line. Also founded a literary festival in the Donetsk region. It is called New York Literature Festival because there is a small town called New York in the Donetsk region, and we can also talk about that. But since the full-scale invasion, it became impossible for me to write fiction. The reality is so intense and painful in Ukraine that I think everyone's testimony is literature now, so you don't need fiction anymore. So after volunteering at the humanitarian warehouse for some time, I switched to helping as a war crimes researcher. So this is what I do now instead of writing novels, but I'm also will be authoring a book about people who document war crimes in Ukraine.
Victoria, let's start before this full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Let's set the stage, and let's first start by talking about the literary festival that you started in Donetsk Oblast, because it was not just started in Donetsk Oblast, but in Donetsk Oblast split in half by the line of contact between free Ukrainian-controlled, free living Donetsk Oblast and the large chunk of it that was under Russian occupation. When did you start the festival?
Well, we only started in 2021. This is when we considered it possible because Ukrainian town New York is located right on the front lines, and it is still there on the front line. So we weren't sure that this is safe, but in 2021 somehow we dared to do the festival, and local authorities gave us permission, because of course we needed some permission, so they would think that this is safe enough for the locals, because of course we were gathering people, including kids. So yeah, we did it in 2021, and it coincided with basically the true name New York being given back to the town, because the town was founded by the German settlers in 19th century. I actually like all these stories about Western Europeans coming to the Donbas region, to Donetsk and Luhansk regions to found factories and coal mines, because it shows how our history is so very much European, and basically is one history with the rest of European continent. And New York was one of the towns founded by Germans. I don't know why they called the town New York. There are many versions, but I just like to think that they wanted this small town to be as ambitious and great as American New York. Anyway, in 1951, Russians, of course, renamed the town. They didn't want to have New York in the USSR, so they renamed it to a Russianized name, Novgorodskaya, which basically means new town, but in Russian. And the local community, after Ukraine gained independence, the local community fought for getting their New York name back. We wanted to support them in this, bringing attention of our parliament, Verkhovna Rada, to help them rename the town officially. But by the time we had festival, the town has already been renamed. I even like thinking that perhaps this was just one of the symptoms, one of the signs that Ukraine was getting back its identity, its history, its true history, not the false history that the USSR and Russia tried to make us believe. So this is why, Russia invaded, because even in the Donetsk region, local communities managed to bring their European history back, and there would be no return after that.
So you started this in autumn last year on a town that was just by the line of contact, right? The center of the town is what, 5-6 kilometers from the line of contact, something like that, right?
Yeah, perhaps. From the city border, because I had relatives there, and the house we had there in Ukrainian New York is less than 2 kilometers from the line of contact.
What state was the town in when you were holding this festival? What was the life like in the town during this period when much of Europe thought that this was a perfectly frozen conflict, that nothing was going on anymore?
Well, of course, there was shelling from time to time. And for example, we already know that, I think you already know that Russian-like symbolism. And for example, they shelled New York on September 11, 2021. So I'm sure this was important for them to drop mines on New York, on Ukrainian New York on September 11. It might sound crazy for those who not speak Russian and do not deal with Russians directly, but to me, as a native Russian speaker, this is evident that they were trying to make a statement, basically dropping mines on New York exactly on September 11. So yes, these tragic events kept happening from time to time, but of course the shelling and it was not so intense since 2015. So it was possible to live there, and there were two schools operating in the town. Three actually. One is in the what they called Iron Town, the Lizne village, and the locals had a joke that it should be called Iron Town. So there were three schools, plenty of kids, and I used to talk with the teens a lot because we also did an essay contest in New York. And those teens told me that they grew up at this war, and they basically have a lot of empathy for their parents, because parents keep worrying for their families. But those teens who grew up there got used to the sound of distant shelling, so it was okay for them. But of course, it all intensified after February 24th. And all those kids we used to visit in New York and used to bring to Kiev and Lviv, all of them had to evacuate.
How did you go about organizing the festival there? I'm sure that you've done similar events elsewhere in very different locations and very different circumstances. What was different about trying to do it there? Indeed, just a few weeks after it was shelled again on September 11th,
Yeah,
2021.
just a few weeks. Well, first, of course, the security, we had to get the permission, and but the permission from local Ukrainian authorities meant to me that it is safe. But it was easier, I think, to organize a festival at the front line than doing it elsewhere in Ukraine, because everyone wanted to help. This was, such a warm idea for everyone to do that, to not be afraid of Russians and just do a literary festival and read Ukrainian poems, entertain kids with Ukrainian children's literature, have a concert of Ukrainian music there on the front line. So it was it became such an important idea for everyone that basically everyone was helping the local authorities, my fellow writers. I don't have to, writers usually have to get paid for coming to a festival, but there they wanted to volunteer. So it was even easier because everyone came united to do this. And we also had an excursion around this small New York. It was done by locals, of course. We actually invited locals to participate, and we had local bands there. For example, the festival was opened by the violinists from Toretsk, and we tried to make it all seem like a fancy festival that could be happening anywhere in the world. So we had violins, coffee, cookies, etc. at the opening. And everyone wanted to help. And by the way, Ukrainian soldiers came and they cooked for the locals. They cooked their, what they usually we call it soldiers. Soldiers meal. So I'm not sure how to say it, but so anyway, they were cooking for the locals, and it was really warm to see how Ukrainian soldiers and the locals interact in the Donetsk region at a literary festival. So yeah, by the way, this makes me a person who always doesn't know how to react to any kind of propaganda, about Ukraine bombing Donbass, what Russia is trying to make everyone believe. Because I was the one, organizing literary events there, and seeing how well it went and how everyone was happy. And now, of course, all of this is ruined. The last heritage from the German settlers of 19th century, the German mill has been hit. In the beginning of the Russian invasion, the local library is damaged, the kindergarten, the schools were hit. So it all changed, and of course we canceled this year's festival, and we decided not to do it elsewhere, but we have a hashtag in Ukrainian in New York after the victory в Нью-Йорку після перемоги. So we really would like to do the next festival in New York. There was an important moment in the first edition of the festival on the excursion, which I've already mentioned, because the excursion ended with the panorama of the occupied city of Horlivka. So for the guests of the festival, it was important, for many journalists who gathered there, it was important to basically come to this hill from where they could see the occupied territory. And it's such a moment of warmth when you can finally see your occupied land, and you're not afraid, and you hope and believe that one day it will be liberated. It was very important back then.
Victoria, at the time, just a few months before the full-scale invasion started, were you expecting something quite like what started off on February 24th this year?
I didn't know what to expect. I was sure that something will be happening in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. So I was really afraid for all the people I know. For example, in this small town of New York and many other villages and towns and cities in the Donetsk and Luhansk region, because before the festival, I also visited them as a writer a lot. So I was worried for these regions, and I was right. For example, look what they've done to Mariupol. I mean, that was the right concern, but I didn't expect they would bomb Kyiv immediately. This came unexpected to me. Basically, I think I was quite logical, because it seemed to me that the troops they gathered at the border are not enough to take and control Kyiv. It was so obvious to me and to everyone around me, because we, of course, knew that we would resist. But, perhaps Russia's leadership didn't know that. So yes, this came unexpected, because it was obvious for us that with the number of troops they had, they wouldn't be able to capture Kyiv. So it was unexpected. I was abroad at the time. I was on vacation, so I had a flight scheduled back to Ukraine on February 24th, exactly 7 a.m. Of course, they didn't let us on the flight. Because the sky was already closed, but not in a way we would like it to be closed from Russian missiles, but it was closed from civilian aviation. So I spent 2 days trying to get back to Ukraine, and I was back to Ukraine on February 26th.
Back to Lviv or back to Kyiv?
I was back to Lviv actually, and I spent March in Lviv helping to accept all those people coming from Kyiv mainly, but also, of course, the Donetsk region, the Kharkiv region. I was helping to organize how they settle in Lviv for the time. And also coordinating the work of the humanitarian aid warehouse, which was, urgently organized in Lviv. I came back to Kyiv on April 3rd. So right after I knew that I wouldn't fall into the hands of Russian soldiers, I went back to Kyiv by Ukrzaliznytsia, by Ukrainian railway.
When you got to Kyiv, of course, it was very differently exposed to how Lviv was during those first 6 weeks or so. I'll just ask you this one, then we can go on to your work since then. But what was that experience like? The getting back to the city where you live, that is very different from how you left it just a few weeks before that.
You see, I have apartments both in Kiev and Lviv, since I'm Lviv native. But I always had a lot of work to do in Kiev, so I have two homes. So it's not that I wasn't at home in Lviv, but of course it was so important for me to get back to Kiev. And I have witnessed during March, I have witnessed all my friends from Kiev who were dreaming about coming back, and it was important for me to see the city. But I have to tell you that it was so empty, and it was painful. I immediately, of course, visited my friends who spent the occupation there, who weren't able to evacuate, for example, because they had elderly parents or something. So it was important for me to see it and to stay there since then.
All right, thank you, Victoria. Before we turn to the question of war crimes, some stories for you to share, stories that you've been uncovering over the past weeks. I'll just have Wendy go ahead, because I think Wendy might have a quick question between, and then we'll go to some stories of war crimes and then open it up to the floor afterwards. Wendy.
Thank you, Dermot. Thank you, Victoria, for coming to speak today and for your work on war crimes. My question is specifically about your work as a war crimes investigator. So the people deported by Moscow into the Russian Federation in particular. Domin, is it okay if I go ahead and ask that?
You can, but I don't specify in deportations, so I won't. I'm not sure if I know more than you do. I specify in not open source investigations, but on the ground work. And so I go to the liberated territories, for example, and record people's testimonies. Of course, this is not what we can do. I cannot go to Russia and look for people there.
Understood. Thank you for your work, ma'am.
Thank you.
So maybe let's start with that. What areas, what newly liberated territories have you worked in ever since you started some 7 months ago?
So of course it's the Kiev region, and then the Kharkiv region, and lately Kherson region. But I mainly concentrate on the Kharkiv one, like Izum, for example, Kapitolivka, Balaklia.
All right. Shall we go straight into, let's say, the first testimony, wherever you'd like to go, but anything that has particularly moved you?
It's actually I don't know. It's good. Well, I cannot say it's a good day to talk about this war crime, but today it's a terrible day actually for entire Ukrainian cultural community, literary community, because today we've all learned that the death of Ukrainian writer, children's author, and poet Volodymyr Vakulenko is finally confirmed. Volodymyr Vakulenko was kidnapped 2 times from his village near Izum called Kapitolivka. First, he was kidnapped with his little son Vitaly, and this was terrifying thought that his kid is also in danger. But then they let the kid go, and they even let Volodymyr go for the first time, but took his documents and his cell phones to check for any Ukrainian materials. Volodymyr, of course, knew that there's enough Ukrainian materials on his cell phones. He even had a patriotic ringtone, quite offensive towards Vladimir Putin. So he didn't have doubts that he will be arrested by the occupiers again. And he hid his word diary, his writer, so he kept a word diary, and he hid it in his garden under a tree. And the next day, the occupiers came again and took Volodymyr Vakulenko, Ukrainian writer. And since then, his parents and his son has never seen him. One of the neighbors has seen Volodymyr at the local school in the basement, of course. You perhaps already know that Russian occupiers always station at schools. It is quite a habit. And they usually have a torture chamber at the basement of Ukrainian schools. So Volodymyr was seen in one of these torture chambers, and his neighbor was tortured and released. But Volodymyr was not released, and we heard different rumors about where he might be, and there was a lot of hope. His mother Olena and his father were hoping to see him alive. His little son Vitaly has autism, and so it's quite difficult to communicate with him. So we do not know what he really understands about his father's situation. But today we all learned that finally a DNA test came, and Volodymyr is among those buried at the Izum mass grave that you've all must have seen online. The interesting thing is that we, the Truth Hounds NGO documenting war crimes, were the first ones to reach Volodymyr's parents in September. We recorded the testimony of Volodymyr's father and mother on September 24th, so exactly half a year after their son was kidnapped by the Russian occupiers. And we also found a diary. It's not that we found it, but Volodymyr's father told me that when Volodymyr hid his war diary, he said that when our guys come, please give them the diary. In Ukrainian, that would be "Коли наші прийдуть від даси." I'm saying this because I know that Ukrainians are also listening to MriyaReport. And so actually his father thought that our guys is me. Because I'm also a writer, and apparently, Ukrainian armed forces had a lot of work to do, so they didn't approach him. So we found together this diary, and I brought it. And right now, the diary of the Ukrainian writer killed by Russian occupiers is in Kharkiv Literary Museum. And now, after we finally are sure that, unfortunately, Volodymyr is not with us anymore, I think this war diary will be published.
So he was
Any questions on this story?
So he was in a village just outside of Izium, right?
Yes, like a bit closer to Russia than Izium itself.
When did this happen? When did they take him, kidnap him, arrest him, whatever word you would best prefer to say?
It was March. He was first kidnapped on March 22nd, and they eventually took him and never returned him on March 24th, 2022. So during the occupation. And basically, his war diary ends with the first signs of spring. And Volodymyr Vakulenko writes in his diary that it seems to him that the birds are chirping. Everything will be Ukraine. I believe in victory. So yeah, it was the end of March.
Have you read his diary, Victoria?
Yes, I did. I actually had a hard time having it with me because I was on a war crimes documentation mission, and war crimes documentation missions in Truth Hounds last for 5 days or more. So I couldn't bring the diary to safety immediately. I had to keep traveling the Izum region after its liberation, and I didn't know where to keep this diary. And I realized that it is precious for as a testimony, and not for judicial system, but for Ukrainian culture, and as a heritage of a writer who was perhaps killed. I wasn't really optimistic about finding him alive from my experience. This is what happens to people like him. They are being tortured and killed. So it was really important for me to keep this diary. I couldn't really read well his handwriting at first, but I could see what I just quoted to you, that it seems to him that birds are singing about Ukraine's victory. And he also had this dark sense of humor that we all develop in during this full-scale invasion of Ukraine. For example, he was writing about the lullaby for the enemy's tank. So he was making fun a little bit of enemies' tanks, for example. I couldn't read it, the handwriting, but as soon as I passed the diary to the Kharkiv Literature Museum, it was transcribed. And it was shared with me as well. So I've read it then. And it's all about, how he worries about his son. Volodymyr felt guilty, for example, about having to switch to Russian. He always spoke Ukrainian, but he was worried about his son's safety. That's why he switched to Russian, talking to occupiers, hoping that they wouldn't do harm to him and his son in this case. Of course, it didn't help. But yeah, it's so moving that he felt guilty about having to switch to Russian and not, holding his ground and keeping speak Ukrainian. So things like that. It's a war diary, so there's nothing, too personal. So I think the diary will be published.
The last entries before he was taken by the occupiers.
Yeah, what I quoted,
foresight?
It's about birds and about victory of Ukraine, about how he believes that Ukraine will win, and it's a testimony of incredible courage, because I'm not sure that on March 24th I believed that we would regain Izum, but Volodymyr Vikulenko did believe in that. He was sure of that, and I mean, this is why he hid the diary, and this is what he's writing. And so this is an incredible courage and incredible faith in Ukrainian armed forces. So he was a great man, and yeah, we should remember him now.
How will the Ukrainian literary community remember him, Victoria?
We'll see. We only learned about his death today. It's very important that his diary is in Kharkiv Literature Museum. I don't know if your listeners already know about the executed Renaissance, about the generation of Ukrainian writers from 1920s who were almost all were murdered by the Soviet regime in 1930s. They all lived in Kharkiv, mainly in the Slovo building. This building was apartment building, was specifically built for Ukrainian intelligentsia, for Ukrainian writers, artists. So they were all gathered in one place, and they were allowed to create for some time, and then they were all arrested one by one, and then executed, then shot, most of them. Or sent to the Russian camps somewhere north. So basically, this Kharkiv Literature Museum that now has the diary of a Ukrainian writer killed just recently in March 2022. This museum was dedicated to those Ukrainian writers murdered by Soviet Russian regime in 1930s. So there is a great symbolism already in the fact that this diary kind of joined this this the other manuscripts and artifacts from the generation of writers that we cherish and that we try to, remember. So I'm sure that there are different ways. So it's difficult to comment on that, but I can envision that there might be a literary prize, for example, children's literary prize named after him. This is just my idea; it just popped into my mind. But I will share this idea with my fellow writers, and I think something like that will definitely happen in the near future. This is what we usually do, for example. Well, I'm not sure this is public, but you all, of course, know Roman Ratushny, and I know there are plans for having Roman Ratushny festival in Protasiev Yar in the park that he protected in Kiev. So this is what we do. We will try to, it won't be about monuments. I think it will be about literary prizes for young Ukrainian writers, about events. We will try to keep his memory alive, to help people see what he wore and keep doing what he was doing. Because I actually met Volodymyr Vakulenko only once. I met him in Kramatorsk on one of the literary festivals. He was always ready to go to the front line as well. Basically, there is one thing I regret, because he wanted to come to New York Literature Festival as well, but I already had the program full, and I told him that he's welcome next year. As you can see, this year the festival isn't happening, and Volodymyr Vakulenko, unfortunately, is somewhere in heaven.
Victoria, let's dig just a little into history here, because of what you brought up, the Ukrainian writers who were summarily executed en masse in the early 1930s. Can you give everyone just a little insight into history, how the Ukrainian language was allowed under false pretenses to get a foothold in the 1920s, only so that it could be, and those who wrote in it, those who used it to its fullest in terms of literature, to be better suppressed, found out, and dispensed with in the 1930s?
Yeah, exactly. It was very successful, I don't know, special operation, because Soviet regime pretended that they support Ukrainian literature. They did so to attract more followers, because the Soviet Union was established in 1922, but it wasn't so popular in Ukraine. It's not that we joined the Soviet Union voluntarily, but as a result of war. So the Ukrainian culture was supported. There was a new theater, a very avant-garde theater, led by Les Kurbas, an avant-garde Ukrainian director, and many writers, poets who developed, for example, in poetry, it was futurism. So it was not. It was on the very edge of the literary or theatrical or artistic process at the time. But then the repression started, and the first one to realize what was going to happen was Mykola Khvylevy, one of the leaders of the movement, and he killed himself in the Slava building I've mentioned. He killed himself because he could see what was coming, and he realized that they were all trapped. And after that, the repressions followed, and most of the writers were shot dead in Sandermoch in 1937. It's like up to 90% of writers were executed. And before the full-scale invasion, I was actually trying to imagine how I would live with if 90% of my colleagues and friends would be executed. So yes, this was the story of the 1930s, and of course, then the manuscripts were lost. For example, speaking about Mykola Khvylevy, who killed himself before Russians could get to him. the second part of his novel Waldschneppe was confiscated. It was already published in one of Ukrainian magazines, but all the copies were confiscated and I don't know, somehow destroyed. And we still don't have the second part of his novel. That's why I find it ironic how Russians would say that manuscripts don't burn. That's a quote from Mikhail Bulgakov. Ukrainian manuscripts do burn, unfortunately, and we still don't have the second half of one of the best Ukrainian novels of the time. So I see a lot of parallels here, and basically we all expected that if Ukraine would be occupied, Ukrainian writers would be executed again, and the body bags that Russian soldiers had with them, I think they were for Ukrainian elite, for the journalists, for the mayors, and for the writers.
Of course, ironic that is from Voland in Master.
Yeah, it's
right?
yeah.
Ironic that it would be from Bulgakov.
Yeah, you
Victoria.
see, many of us we were brought up on Russian literature as well, so we know our enemy and we can quote Bulgakov.
Where else shall we turn, Victoria?
I will proceed to the next story. Yeah, I will proceed to the next story, and I'm going to cover it in my book, but it's good to tell about Fedor Zdebsky to your audience. Fedor Zdebsky is another victim of the Russian occupiers in Izum. He was a medical expert, forensic expert in Izum's morgue. And this story particularly moved me because, all the journalists came to the morgue to talk about all other victims, but rarely asked people who worked at the morgue what they've lived through. And in fact, on the 7th May, they had an incident there. One of the Russian occupiers tried to take the car of Fedor Zdebsky, and I have to say Fedor Zdebsky was 75 years old at the time, and he didn't have his left leg. So due to his disability, his car had hand controls. So it was really important for him to keep this car, because otherwise he wouldn't be able to move around anymore. So he didn't agree to give away his car to the occupier. He kept speaking Ukrainian to him. And basically preparing to our talk, I even wrote down the quote, because the occupier asked Fedor if, who's guilty that I have to sleep in the trenches and I'm cold here. So this occupier, had something, he thought that Ukrainians are guilty, that he has to fight in Ukraine. And Fedor Zdebsky told him, you are guilty yourself. You came to my land, you occupied my Izum. He said this in Ukrainian, and this Russian occupier, and I have actually his call sign and everything, but I just don't want to tell it because it might, interfere with the investigation. This occupier shot him dead. The witness we talked to is a woman, a nurse who worked and still works at the morgue. The bad thing also about, and the particular thing about this story, is that the body of Fedor Zdebsky was taken away from Izum. The refrigerator truck came and took away the body from the morgue where he worked in just several days after he was shot. And to me, I mean, this is only one case. I'm only one war crimes researcher, so I cannot give you statistics here. But in this case, we see that the body was taken away, and this means that the number of bodies that we've discovered, I mean, Ukrainian authorities discovered in Izum, does not match the number of actual victims. Because, for example, here was a clear war crime that had witnesses, and there are even the bullet traces on the ceiling of the morgue. So they just took the body away, and they also took the documents of the victim away. So we would never discover this story, and it's just the witnesses' testimony that worked for us. And so I just wonder how many other bodies were moved like that. We know that they move bodies of Russian soldiers, of course, to conceal their losses, but they might also be doing this to Ukrainian victims, unfortunately.
Was the 70-year-old man without a left leg a threat of any sort?
Oh. Yeah, of course no. Yeah, but he was, you see, he stood up to them, and what the occupier said before shooting him is like, "Oh, they are on the other side. We should deal with those three." He said this about all three people who were at the morgue at the time, about this nurse and the doctor. So they were afraid for their lives as well. The nurse basically managed to run out, and so they just escaped. But it was the policy. You had to demonstrate loyalty, otherwise you would be killed. It wasn't even enough to be silent. You had to demonstrate that you are pro-Russian, that you embrace Russian occupation. So standing up and saying that Izum does not belong to Russian occupiers, of course, was the only reason for killing. So this is a clear war crime, and there is a pattern. We have a lot of crimes like that. Like, I was not involved in the investigation, but I'm sure you've all heard by the killing of Yuri Kerpatenko, the director of Ukrainian orchestra in Kherson. He was shot dead as well, just because he refused to participate in the concert that Russians were organizing in Kherson. So his only fault was also not supporting the Russian regime.
Victoria, how many cases, when you were in and around Izum, did you come across more cases that were unresolved, where it just wasn't sure whether, or rather, how many more reports were there like this beyond the bodies found in those mass graves in the forest?
You have to understand that we were just, for example, in Izum, we were just a team of 6 people working there for a week. And during this first week in September, we discovered more than 75 victims of abduction and torture. So this, for example, doesn't include this forensic expert who was killed. So just 75 persons who were abducted and tortured. And we've discovered 3 torture chambers. We informed then the Ukrainian security service, and I know that police then came with their criminology lab to examine the places. So we are just helpers, we try to help the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine and Ukrainian Security Service, Ukrainian police. We try to support them because you know that the number of war crimes cases is right now about 40,000, and this is just what is registered in General Prosecutor's Office. So in fact, there are of course much more. But already there's no judicial system can cope with this number of cases. So we are just helping. But already on the first visit to the Izum region, we ourselves uncovered 3 new torture chambers. So this is just what our team came across. This is what was new.
Where were these torture chambers, Victoria?
These were in Balaklia. Basically, I wouldn't be able to remember, addresses or something. They were in Balaklia, and we worked more in Balaklia in that regard. Not in the Zoom, because you know how it happens. For example, everyone knows Bucha in the Kiev region, but people rarely go to Matizhin or Andriivka, other places. But in fact, the pattern was the same everywhere. So we concentrated on Balaklia, realizing that the judicial system, the law enforcement system, works more in the Zoom. That's why we were, able to support them in Balaklia. Yeah, these were in the city of town of Balaklia. It's a small town, I guess.
You said you uncovered 3 torture chambers anew on top of what has already been found previously. How many people lived in Balaklia before the occupation?
Oh, that's a difficult question for me. I don't know. Basically, my estimate would be like, I don't know, 30,000. We should Google it. I don't know. That's not a big. To me, I'm from. Live in Kiev. I'm from Lviv, so to me it looked like a village. You see, I'm even doubting if it's a village or a town. So it's small. But they had a military plant there, so this might be the cause. But they do this everywhere. I mean, in Kapitolivka, the village we first talked about, where the Ukrainian writer Volodymyr Vikulenko lived, there was a torture chamber in the local school. And I'm sure there were more torture chambers there. I mean, it does not depend on the size of the village. For example, in the Kherson region, I worked in for small villages, and they had small torture chambers wherever there were a base of Russian occupiers. This is just their style. This is their method of warfare, unfortunately. So they just do it all over the place.
So I checked 27,000 apparently. You were right.
Yeah, I almost guessed. Yeah.
Almost perfectly right. But this is, I think what I want to illustrate with this is saying, look, this was a town that was right on the front lines, very close to the front lines. It was the first town from where the front lines were for many months. It was the sort of place where soldiers, normal soldiers in a war, the way war is usually imagined, would be rather busy doing other war things, not committing genocide, not torturing, especially not organizing several torture chambers in a town, certainly a town that small. I think it says something about priorities. Of course, there's no question that what they did was abhorrent in the first place, but it's not just about that. It's also about how they clearly prioritize that, how a large part of their aim, their goal of being there was that was the end goal. It wasn't just the process. It was the reason for being there in the first place.
This brings us to this third story I was going to share, and it's from the Kherson region, and it basically illustrates what you say about how the priorities are managed. Basically, the man was kidnapped from his village, from the checkpoint, because the Russian occupiers didn't like a funny video of about Ukrainian army in his cell phone. I'm sure you've seen a lot of TikToks of Ukrainian army dancing. So one of them was the cause to kidnap a man from the checkpoint, a man who's the father of 2 little kids, whom I've met. Because the man managed to escape. But I was going to say that he was not only beaten in his village, but he was taken to the front lines. He couldn't see because he was blindfolded. But he could hear the fighting, all the explosions. So he thinks this was a front line, and he was brought to some place where he was beaten multiple times by different units. So the units changed, and after they came, after fighting, he was fun for them. He was like a toy for them to beat. So this is just, like when you have poor corporate culture, this is what happens, and it looks like this is how they have fun there, and they have beaten him just for fun, and playing Russian roulette, shooting at his head, but he was lucky, and they were very angry that he got lucky. So yeah.
How long did this go on for?
I'd have to check, because you can imagine how many testimonies I've recorded, but he spent several days like that, and of course they didn't feed him. They did nothing, and yeah, the only person who helped him, just weakening the. His hands was tied behind his back, and of course he couldn't feel his hands because it was going on for days. And one Russian soldier decided to help him and to lessen a little bit the ties on his hands, but the man had to do it when his colleagues didn't see. Because it would also endanger him. So it to me, it shows that this violence is very systematic, because even if someone wants to help, others wouldn't support this. This is just the policy. You have to be cruel. This is Russian policy.
And then what did they do with him? Did they just take him back
They
and release
arrested
him?
him. No. Of course, they didn't release him. I just don't want to go into details, because he managed to escape with the help of a local woman, and I'm afraid she's still on the occupied territory. That's why I wouldn't go into details of how he escaped. But he wouldn't. They wouldn't release him. He escaped because of the help of a local woman who is collaborating, but also helped at least this man to escape. And she helped him because she saw his wife's post in the social media, and she called his wife. And of course, to the occupiers, she spoke Russian, but to this wife, she spoke in Ukrainian, and she had a great empathy for her. So that's why she helped.
Thank you, Victoria. I will stop monopolizing the conversation with you and open it up to the floor. First, our friend Wendy, and then to Charles. Wendy, please.
Victoria, thank you. Thank you for the hugely significant work you do for Ukraine and the rest of the world. Your work in documenting these war crimes is vital for maintaining awareness of the experience of Ukrainians in countries like mine, which are fortunate to not have experienced what your country is going through. So thank you.
Thank you.
The victims of war crimes you met, did you meet any men who managed to survive occupation? And how could you give us an understanding of how they managed to outlive the Russian occupation?
Thank you. Yes, of course I have. It was really difficult for them. I always quote one man who didn't survive anything terrible in particular. I mean, just living several months under Russian occupation is already horrible. But I mean, he wasn't kidnapped or tortured. He was just a worker of a local plant. He told me that he felt like the smallest insect because he realized they could do anything to him. He told me I couldn't go to the police. I couldn't go to the prosecutors. I mean, he suddenly realized this ordinary man without a higher education, he suddenly realized in depth all how precious democracy is and how these democratic institutions we have are important, how law enforcement system is important, because suddenly he lost them. And it pretty much summarizes the feeling. Those men feel they cannot protect their families or themselves. They try to help. Many of them, of course, for example, in the Kherson region, there are beautiful stories of men helping civilians to cross the river Ingulets, because at some point, at least in some villages, this is the testimonies I have, the Russian occupiers didn't let Ukrainian civilians out because they perhaps used them as a shield. But this man helped his fellow villagers and people whom he didn't know to cross the river by boat. So they did what they could, but of course it's very difficult for everyone. And as of course, you know how we are socialized, men are socialized to be responsible for their families. So far, I'm a feminist, and I think we both should be responsible. But so far, of course, to men, it's I guess in Ukraine, especially in the villages, it was difficult to realize they cannot protect their families. And you know, but on the other hand, their wives showed such courage because, for example, when this man I was talking about who was taken to the front line and beaten there, his wife was so brave. He went to the occupiers. He argued with them. He did everything she could to get him back. Of course, she couldn't, but she showed an incredible bravery. And this is the case for the mother of Volodymyr Vakulenko, Ukrainian writer, and everyone else. This is what Ukrainian women were doing at the time. But for men, yeah, they knew they are the first target because, of course, Russian mainly kill men in the villages and cities occupied.
Thanks, Doman. Victoria, you have founded a literature festival in a part of Ukraine which has been occupied for 8 years. The people you met when you first founded this literature festival, many I assume had to evacuate in 2014 or 2016, 2022. Am I correct that many, like many other Ukrainians, they now live in different areas of Europe? And whilst they've obviously worked very hard to build a life in another country, do they envisage a future one day when they can return to Donetsk Oblast?
Thank you very much for your question. To make sure we're on the same page, of course, I didn't go to any occupied areas of the Donetsk region. Donetsk region was never occupied entirely, so this New York is on the front line, but on the Ukrainian side, of course. I wouldn't go to Donetsk because I perhaps would be immediately arrested, and yeah, you would know me from this side as a political prisoner. Yeah, basically the theme of the literary festival we planned for 2022 was the occupation of the future, because I felt for these 8 years that people who live near the front line cannot make plans. And basically we, all Ukrainians, couldn't really make plans, long-term plans, because how can you plan if you don't know whether you will be invaded the next month? I don't know how to answer your question, because I mostly spent time in Ukraine, and I don't speak a lot with people who evacuated from, for example, Mariupol to Europe. I had spoken to people from Mariupol who stay in Ukraine, in Kryvyi Rih, for example, and they are going to stay in Ukraine and build their future there. Oh no, I'm not right. I was in Ireland at the beautiful festival in Dublin called Arts and Rights Festival, and we have also organized Pan Ireland organized a great event for Ukrainian kids there. And there I met a girl from Mariupol. I knew she was from Mariupol because of her drawing, because she signed it Alice from Mariupol. It was quite a moment for me, of course. I have to say that this little girl, she was, I don't know, about 9 or 10 years old. It's hard to tell. But she spoke perfect English already. So perhaps she evacuated in spring. And she was quick to pick up English, and her English is much better than mine. Yeah, I was thinking then that, yeah, she speaks perfect English and she'll probably stays in Ireland and will be happy there. And I'm glad for her. I hope she remembers some of Ukraine, or maybe she comes back. But when you're from Mariupol, I mean, where would you come back? It's different for people from Kiev. Or even Kherson now, they have somewhere to come back to. But when you're from Mariupol, I mean, it's tough. But I also know people from Mariupol who want to stay in Kyiv, Lviv, Kryvyi Rih, as I mentioned, and they want to stay in Ukraine.
Thank you, Victoria. Here we operate on a policy of preferential treatment for anyone called Victoria. So I'll pass it to the other Victoria. Victoria.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I told Domin that I have to leave in a second. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us today. What a fantastic interview. I always knew that we have a lot of talented people in Ukraine. So just please know that we work 24/7, so you can join anytime, or just join, or just let me know if you would like to join. So yeah, thank you so much. And I have a question. So after this war is over, how do you see your future? Do you continue with your writing career? Are you gonna maybe organize more festivals? Like, can you please talk about it a little bit? And thank you again.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we have a joke that after victory we all just sleep. Finally. I don't know. It's difficult to see the future. Actually, I was telling about the time when I first came back to Kyiv on April 3rd, after the Kyiv region was deoccupied, liberated. And back then I had a talk with my friend who's also a writer, and of course, I mostly listened because he lived through the Kyiv siege, and it was really tough for her. So I mainly listened to her. And suddenly she turned to me and asked, "Do you see the future?" It was so important for her because during March, perhaps she was trying to see the future and she couldn't. So it's a very good question, a very deep one. I don't know. I don't know how many strengths I myself have to go. My 11-year-old son is in Poland, so he's safe. He doesn't go to the Kharkiv region with me, for example. He's in Poland and he goes to school. But he always asks me, when can we come back to Ukraine? So I guess it doesn't matter to me whether I will be writing or doing something else. I just would like to enjoy peaceful life, to be able to live peaceful life again, to finally build a house. I've finally, or I don't know, tragically, I was dreaming about having a home in Bucha. So I used to bring everyone in Bucha to show them how beautiful this town is. It was really, I mean, one of the most beautiful places to live in Ukraine, with all the pine trees. And so this was a dream for me to have my home among the pine trees in Bucha. Maybe this is what I will do, because this name shouldn't be only for suffering. This should be a name for a new life as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, and I hope your dreams come true. I hope you have a nice, beautiful, big house, and your son comes back to Ukraine.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I wish you best, and thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Victoria, can you dig a little bit deeper on that one? How was Bucha before the world knew the word Bucha?
You see, I first came not to Bucha, but to Irpin. There was a literary seminar there where I was a teacher. And I remember sitting in the central park of Irpin, and I was just looking for an apartment in downtown Kyiv at the time. And in Irpin, I thought, oh, I don't need an apartment in Kyiv. I need an apartment in Irpin or home in Irpin because it was made perfect. Young people settled there because at first the real estate was a bit cheaper than in Kyiv. And there were a lot of new buildings. That's why it looked so nice, because Soviet architecture wasn't always beautiful. But in Irpin and Bucha, they built a lot of cottages, a lot of new homes and apartment buildings, and young people lived there. These were, European-minded people who wanted their area to look just like European towns and cities. So it was so neat, and there were a lot of cafes. And in Bucha, they also had, and still have actually, they have a beautiful park. And it basically then, so I first wanted to live in Irpin, but then my friend, poet Yulia Stakhivska, who lived in Bucha, told me, no, you haven't seen Bucha. Bucha is even more beautiful. Bucha's park is more beautiful. And I did come to her to see this park. And this park was an enormous, beautiful park ending with a lake. And it had not a literary festival, but a musical festival, an orchestra one. So before that, Bucha was a place of orchestra festival. Not a place of suffering. I saw how good it was. It was really green, unlike Kyiv, which resembles New York at times. For example, my problem in Kyiv right now is that I live on one of the top floors of the building that have 25 floors. I won't tell you the exact floor for safety reasons, but it's very high. And of course, without electricity, it's difficult to climb there. And I don't see any green trees from that floor, of course. But in Bucha, it was all green, and it looked like paradise, actually.
A lot of people who moved to the new development, especially in and around Irpin, moved there after 2014. A lot of people who had to evacuate first from the initial occupied territories, especially in eastern Ukraine, some also from Crimea.
Yeah, it's also because
I know
of class,
you know what I'm going to ask you.
If I know some people like that, I think I have some friends on Facebook, because I've seen a lot of story like that. But I don't have close friends like this who would move to Irpin or Bucha from these regions. Because mainly my friends from, for example, Luhansk region is very much, it just looks like Bucha or Irpin, because there are beautiful pine trees, or were beautiful pine trees in Luhansk region. I remember seeing the trees damaged by grads in, I don't know what year it was, but after 2015, I really love pine trees, and it was painful for me to see these traces of how they were burned by the shells. So I think this is one of the reasons why people moved there, because it looked like Luhansk region, for example, but also the prices, of course, which were more affordable than center of Kyiv. I have a friend, a famous Ukrainian writer, Olena Stashkina from Donetsk, who moved to Kyiv. She was, she felt hopeless even in April, because she was so terrified of this thought that she would have to leave her home once again. She was so stubborn, and she said she'd never leave. But of course, she wouldn't leave under occupation. So I mean, we had to defend people like that, and just those for whom the occupation would be the first one, because they just, some maybe didn't realize how terrible the Russian occupation would be. But of course we did. I mean, my friends like Elena Stashkina told me the stories, so the first-hand stories from the occupation of Donetsk. And of course, we all, and this is a book recommendation. There is a book by Stanislav Aseyev, a Ukrainian journalist who was a political prisoner in the isolation camp. Isolation is a former art center in Donetsk, which Russians turned into a camp, prison, big torture center. I don't know what you call it. And Stanislav Aseyev was a prisoner there for several years. I don't remember 2 or 3, but anyway, a significant amount of time. And he wrote a couple of books about that. They were published, I think, by Ukrainian Harvard Research Institute. So you can Google this. I think one of the books is called Paradise Street, because ironically, the isolation camp was on the Paradise Street in Donetsk.
Torture camp on Paradise Street is what the English translation is.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
You see, war somehow interferes with your memory, and we all started forgetting so much, perhaps because your brain tries to make you forget all the horrible moments. So yes, there's something going on with my memory and the memory of my friends. So thank you so much.
Victoria, when you were in New York, did you speak to people who were already in their second place when they were in New York?
In New York, no, but yeah, I started to tell a story about where people from Luhansk moved, for example, and it was Starobilsk. It's another place where I spent much time. I didn't organize any festival there, but I visited the local library. And I also organized a tour called Reading in Museum, and I visited 10 museums in the Luhansk region in 2018. So I know the region well, and I've met, so of course I traveled the part of the Luhansk region which wasn't occupied at the time, and everywhere I've met people from Luhansk. Basically, I had a connection with Luhansk National University, and they advised each other that they should go and listen to this Ukrainian writer come into their new home. Starobilsk was a place to where Luhansk National University mainly moved. This is why there was a great community. They didn't need me to do a literary festival. They had a musical festival made by famous Ukrainian writer Serhiy Zhadan. It also happened for the first time in 2014. In 2021, so just a year before the war. And then this year Starobilsk was occupied. This is a hometown of famous Ukrainian writer Serhiy Zhadan. He's perhaps the most famous writer in Ukraine right now, and he's from the Luhansk region, from Starobilsk in particular. The professors of Luhansk National University who had to move there and live in some dormitories. The conditions weren't good. They were glad to see writers there in Starobilsk always. Right now, one of them, Valentina Lesnova, for example, is in the Netherlands. She had to evacuate together with her family.
Starobilsk is very well known to everyone here because of two things. Because one, it's on that train line from Troitske towards Severodonetsk, towards Luhansk, and the other because it's the next town, the next leap after Ukrainian forces liberate Svatove, the next logical step is further east towards Starobilsk. Will you be going to Starobilsk as soon as it's free again?
Yes, as soon as it's free, and let's tell the truth, as soon as I have a permit, because, for example, I was able to go to Izum in September because I was with a team of Truth Hounds NGO documenting war crimes, and we had a letter from General Prosecutor's Office. So initially, when the town is liberated, you cannot just freely go there because they do demining. They try to ensure that all the Russian soldiers are not, hiding anywhere, etc. So yeah, I will go as soon as I can, but it just doesn't always depend on me. I'm not a journalist, so I don't have an accreditation to go anywhere I want. So yeah, but I would go as soon as I can. I'd love to see, there were beautiful murals, for example, made in Starobilsk, just Ukrainian ones, and also with Zhidan's poetry, and Russians destroyed them, of course. They just painted the murals in gray paint. I'd love to see them restored.
Thanks, Victoria. We've got a few hands for you. We're so lucky to have you here. Charles.
Yes, thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Victoria, for these moving stories and these insights. My question is you wrote very nicely on your Twitter about Ukrainians being unbreakable, which I absolutely love, but you've also told us stories of pain and loss. So my question is what are the arts doing now to help people deal with this pain and loss, and where do you see Ukrainian arts in the future when victory is achieved to help deal with the memory of this?
Thank you so much for this question, Charles. Well, art's doing a lot. Like, for example, in June, actually on June 4th or 5th, I had first presentation for event for kids in Kharkiv. And then we had a public intellectual discussion about Ukraine in Kharkiv. And a lot of people came. It was important for them to see writers, to see literature and art coming back to Kharkiv. Then I know that a literature festival was held in Kharkiv in August, I guess. September. It actually overlapped with me traveling to Izum. That's why I couldn't visit the festival. So these things are happening. And for example, in Kyiv, I went to theater, and of course, there had to be an air raid alert during the performance. But no one left, and we have these mobile applications on our phones. Basically, I don't, because I don't want to hear air raid alarms, but normal people do have these mobile applications called air raid alert, Повітряна тривога, and someone had this application turned on, so the air raid sirens started, and everyone was upset with that person, like, why didn't you turn it off? Because they wanted to keep watching the performance, and we just kept watching performance. Well, not always a good solution. I'm not saying this is a good thing to do, but this is what people in Kyiv were doing in summer. Right now, it's again more dangerous. Maybe they wouldn't listen. Maybe they would go to a bomb shelter. I also had a literary evening in Lviv. Just recently, just a couple of days ago. It was already after the blackout. We were lucky to have electricity in the theater, but in order to go and be a writer presenting her work at the theater, I had to visit my friend and wash my hair properly, because I didn't have hot running water, but she did. So you know, this is this funny stuff, but there was electricity in the theater, and even if there weren't be electricity, we would stay there with candles and read some poetry and prose. And yeah, of course, people come, and this is very important for them. I think right now Ukrainian writers and musicians even gather bigger audiences than before the full-scale invasion. And this is also true about 2015. After 2015, Ukrainian literature started gaining more interest than before. Also, the exhibitions of contemporary painters are happening in Kiev and Lviv, of course. So life goes on in that sense as well. This is very important and for everyone, and we will keep doing what we're doing.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful to hear.
Thank you.
Victoria, Yuri Karpatenko, conductor with the Kherson Philharmonic Orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
How would you like his memory to echo down the ages? How would you like him to be remembered?
Good question. You see, his theater cannot be renamed after him, I think, shouldn't be renamed after him, because it's already named after Les Kurbas, a theater director, which I was talking to you about. He was and a writer, so it's quite symbolic that he was the chief conductor in the theater named after someone who was shot dead in 1937, and he himself was shot dead in 2022. Maybe this theater would have joint name of Les Kurbas and Yuri Karpatenko. But also, of course, I think there was a musical festival in Kherson, actually, but I'm not sure. You see, Ukraine is a big country, and I'm not a musician, by the way. But Kherson is beautiful. I mean, well, my sister lives there, and she spent, my sister-in-law lives there, and she spent 8 months of occupation in Kherson. She's from the Donetsk region, but she insisted moving to Kherson in 2014. Yeah, we were against it because I said, I mean, this is a way to Crimea for Russians, so you'll end up being a refugee again. I was really saying that, but she wouldn't listen because Kherson was so beautiful and it has this Dnipro River, and it would be a very good place for international festivals. And I would really love for you to come for a festival named after Yuri Karpatenko. I really hope this is what will happen next, not, you know, years of war that would bleed us out, but some bright future with the festivals which all of you visit.
The Kiev Conservatoire could do with a rename. Would you agree?
Yeah. I don't know which name. Is it someone like Tchaikovsky? I don't know what name. I don't remember what name it bears now. So
You're
yeah,
correct.
Yeah, I'm correct. So I guessed it was easy, you know. Everything musical is named after Tchaikovsky in the Soviet Union, and everything literary is named after Pushkin in the Soviet Union. So it was an easy guess. Yes, it could be renamed after Yuri Karpatenko. This is a great idea.
Sounds like a very good idea. And with the range of music that Yuri Karpatenko brought to Ukrainians, it wasn't just classical, was it? It was it was a range of musical genres. It's not necessary, in my opinion at least, it's not necessary for just one building to be named after him, or one particular yearly series of classical music concerts after him. This encompasses this goes across the musical spectrum. So yeah, I very much I'm feel pretty sure, Victoria, that his name will live on in a variety of different educational uses.
Yes, I'm sure of that too.
Thanks. The vital work you do in documenting the crimes happening to your country, Victoria, which Ukraine's many friends and allies around the world have been following, not just since February this year, but since 2014. And you know, so many people have been following these due to the dedicated work of yourself and Ukrainian authorities in documenting these crimes. But this awareness of these crimes, it needs to be, people need to continue being educated about it. How would you like to see people better informed about the plight of Ukrainians?
This is a good question, actually. It will involve all kinds of arts and information sources. I think, one powerful way of influencing the audience is, of course, cinema, but you cannot make a movie about each and every war crime, so there will be a selection. The same is with the books, but there are different small projects. For example, in Bucha, I know a group of people who were working in Bucha to finally identify all the bodies, because until recently the work was not complete. And they were going to do an online project where you'd be able to see the burial places, but also the places where people lived, and be able to read their short stories. I hope they didn't give up on this idea. I just in August I heard the group discussing the idea. It was just born. And I hope they pursue it, and I will be able to share the link on my Twitter. And there are plenty of projects like that. In fact, right now I'm working on a book which is called War and Justice Diary, looking at women looking at war. So I kind of have to, or had to, because most of the choices are already made, but I had to choose people I would be writing about, stories to follow, and projects to follow, because I actually wanted to write about projects like that, about people making an effort to document war crimes or to advocate for international hybrid tribunal for the crime of aggression or a different kind. So I had to choose, and I found out that I won't be able to cover all of them. And the good news is that there's enormous number of war crimes, but there's also an enormous number of projects to commemorate the survivors, the victims, the heroes. So it's also enormous, and there will be really many projects like this, and eventually, this is what happens to all the projects. Some of them will stay and become huge and important, and well, some of them will not be that successful, but there's no chance that this will be forgotten. I mean, I see all the efforts. There's an interesting project called the Reckoning Project, led by Janine Giovanni, an American war correspondent, and Natalia Homeniuk, a Ukrainian journalist, and Peter Pomerantsev. And they are also documenting war crimes, and then also doing journalism about them, like making a documentary or writing a nice long read about the crime. So they are trying to bridge this gap between journalism and war crimes documentation. So there is hope that, for example, there will be, court cases, and also there will be possibility to watch a documentary about the war crime. So, for example, this looks a very good work for me. Yeah, there will be plenty of them, and I wouldn't just choose one so far.
Thanks, Victoria. After Ukraine has won and all of Ukraine is liberated, an understandable, painful legacy will will remain
Mhm.
as a result of these war crimes. How do you see your work and literature and the arts in general contribute towards helping victims and healing people who are affected by this legacy?
Of course, people should be able to see themselves in the stories, because we advocate for justice for everyone. We advocate that the international community help us and strengthen Ukrainian judicial system and create some international tribunal that would be able to cover all these war crimes. But I'm not that optimistic. I guess I realize that it's not possible to have justice for each and every case. So sometimes it will be necessary that people recognize themselves in the work of art, or just able to participate in art. After 2014, we had this form of theater. I'm not sure I know how to convey this well in English, but that's like improvisation theater, where people who suffered or were soldiers at the front line can improvise and tell their stories, and people would come and watch these performances. As far as I've heard, I've done properly. This works really well for both for the participants and for the audience. So maybe some forms like this, because often, especially soldiers, they don't want to go to psychotherapists. They think they are strong, so you'd rather involve them into clubs or theater or whatever, some other forms of activities that help them to express what they feel, not just sit on the couch with the psychotherapist, where it wasn't so common for everyone in Ukraine. So this might be the case, and yeah, when you all say that entire Ukraine will be liberated, I immediately start dreaming about how I finally go to Crimea.
Thank you, Victoria. And that holistic nature that you speak of will be evidently of great benefit.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to go to Charles, who's got his hand up. Thanks, Charles.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks again, Victoria. I have kind of a difficult question. I apologize. I'm fascinated by your children's book, and I guess my question is if you were to write a new children's book now, what would it be about? What would it offer the children?
Basically, I thank you for your question very much, and for for your feedback on my children's book. Basically, I did write a poem, which is kind of a children's book as well. But so far, I didn't have time to find a publisher who would find a decent illustrator. But this is a poem about children who leave their cities and take some objects with them, like a rock or a button. Um, so something small that fits into the pocket. And one of the girls, Vera, doesn't take anything besides the story about coming back. So this exact story, which would be the book. And yeah, so this is perhaps the message that I would convey to I would be able to convey to the children right now, because it's difficult to talk about harsher experiences. I would talk about this need to leave home and the hope for coming back.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Charles, if you'd like a follow-up, please do go ahead, sir.
No, it's okay. Thank you very much, Victoria. It means a lot to me, listening to your answers, listening to your stories, and it's your voice is really touching my heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Victoria, in your answer to Charles's question, you spoke to, you inferred of the resilience of Ukrainian children during this war. How would you like to see their stories and people educated about their experiences be conveyed to free democratic countries?
Well, it might be a great project to write down their stories, or let them write or draw their stories, and make an exhibition or a book. This might be a good idea. I know there is a book published by Bloomsbury of one Ukrainian refugee. But I've never read it, and I don't know. I've heard mixed reviews, so I don't know about it much. But there should be more books like that. I mean, we only had one diary by Anne Frank, but right now many children are able to write diaries, and this could be the way. I mean, one diary was published in English. If other countries like I don't know, Germany or Netherlands would pick other kids' diaries and publish them, that would be nice, so that we would hear diverse experiences from children as well. You see, this is why, for example, I as I said, I don't write fiction, because even a child, when he or she tells her story, it's already a literature in times like this.
That's a wonderful idea, Victoria. Thank you. Dermot, go ahead.
Victoria, we have taken so much of your time already, but I maybe have just one final question, because it's something that keeps coming up again and again, and it's the subject of people being tempted into collaboration, or often forced into collaborating with the occupiers. You mentioned, among other, that the man who works at the morgue being told, either you do as we say, or we will shoot you, and well, that's what they did. Have you come across, when you were speaking to people, any stories of coercion, any stories of people either giving in ever so slightly, perhaps sometimes, or people rejecting it and then suffering the consequences for it or of it?
Thank you so much for this question. This is a tough one. This is, by the way, something for literature to contemplate on, because Milan Kundera said that you shouldn't write a novel about something you would be able to tell by other means, and this is a question which I guess requires novels and novels. Because it's of course it's about survival, and yes, of course there are some people who gladly collaborated with Russians. But there are few of them, and of course fear it plays a great part in this too. I'll tell you one particular story from the Kherson region. It's rather a warm story, or it might not sound like that to you, but to me it's warm. So the story is about how one man was approached by Russian occupiers who just wanted to get drunk, and they ran out of vodka or whatever drinks. And someone told them which villagers make their own wine. Kherson region is suitable for wineries, by the way, so you should consider this as a business opportunity for future. So someone gave up those who had could have had wine in their homes. And as a result of this, Russian occupiers came to one of the homes, but there was no wine anymore because other Russian occupiers have came before and took all the wine. So they shot the elderly man into the leg. He survived. We talked to him. He's in good mood. He showed us pictures of his granddaughter. But what I'm going to say about the collaboration is the following. So all the witnesses that testified about this incident, one by one, told us, we know who betrayed us, but we won't tell you. And this was there was their fellow villager who betrayed them. And the other one was shot. And so it's bad, but they didn't want to tell us. I don't know. Maybe they've beaten him or her themselves. I don't know. Or maybe they've just forgiven, but they didn't want to tell us. They didn't want us to. But we are not security service. We document war crimes, but we do not go after collaborators anyway. But they didn't want to give him up. And this is so telling about, Ukrainian spirit. I think they've just forgiven him.
Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, I see.
That's a funny
I
one,
see
right?
why you think this is a warm story.
Yeah, that's a warm story.
No, but it's something that's very. It speaks to humanity, doesn't it?
Yeah,
that's really what it speaks to.
But you didn't even ask for the name. But they would all keep telling, we know, but we won't tell you.
And I completely understand now what you meant when you said this is more a topic for novels rather than a topic for a short answer. Thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you for everything. Thank you for all the time you took out to talk to us. It was very enlightening, but it was also told differently than it would be told in a courtroom, or differently than it would be reported by someone who doesn't perhaps have your artistic talents or your artistic approach. So I think it might have been even much easier for some to connect with it, to understand it, and perhaps it would be a lot more memorable for some than it would have been told by someone else.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and many thanks to MriyaReport team and all its listeners.
Thank you, Victoria. And anytime you wish to join us, hop on, talk about other things, perhaps things that are much more in the present rather than in the past. Anytime, feel very free to join this open forum.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Victoria. Perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, make sure to give Victoria a follow there, @VAmelina. And perhaps she'll be with us back again. But more importantly, she will continue doing her work, documenting war crimes, documenting what happened to those across Ukraine who either didn't have the foresight to evacuate or were unfortunate enough to be taken by it, or indeed those who just couldn't. Some people just cannot bear it to leave their homes before the occupation comes, it's always particularly disturbing and distressing to then hear what happens to them after it all. Wendy.
Yeah, thank you, Damon. I thought the testimonies that Victoria brought us today, this space always provides an education for myself. Every Ukrainian voice we have on, it presents me with a different human story. And what was particularly striking about Victoria's testimony here today was that she has collected so many human stories. And as she was speaking to us, I had you know, about a dozen questions that I wanted to ask her, all kind of condensed into one eventually. You know, that's the way it often turns out. But it's some of the things that she identified. We've heard before. Some of it is very new. Some of the characters that she identified, that she brought to us were new, I'm sure, to many people here, including myself. People like children's writer Vladimir Vakulenko, who was who lived in the Kharkiv region during the Russian occupation there. His family, till the very last moment that they found him, believed he had survived. He was found in one of the mass graves in Izium, along with 400 other bodies. This gentleman was a children's writer. He was murdered because he was Ukrainian and because he was a man, and he had no record of military service. He was not in uniform, and even if he had been, of course, that, you know, against the laws of armed conflict and the Geneva Conventions, we know that this invading army do not abide by. So yeah, Victoria's testimony here today was really important to hear, and it was a great privilege having her speak on the space.
Charles, we had Victoria speak of Starobilsk. Before we can speak of Starobilsk, there's one place that Ukrainians have to liberate first, isn't it?
Yeah, so I just picked up half the question. So which place do they have to liberate first, did you say?
Svatove, Charles.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're an engineer. What have Russians been building out in front of Svatove over the past, month and a half now?
Well, actually, what's interesting for me at the moment is actually what they're building behind Svatove. So looking at the topographical map of this area, it is dominated by north-south river valleys. These are shallow river valleys, about 150 meters in elevation change, with relatively gradual hills between them, quite flat ridges that are dominated by fields. But what this means is that it's and all the towns like Svatove and Kremina are in the valley. So that means what's difficult is to actually use the towns and the rivers as defensive positions. Essentially, you're kind of fighting ridge to ridge for mortar, artillery, overwatch, all of these kinds of things. So this makes sense why the Russians are defending their line as much as they can, because they're gradually being pushed back to the edge of the ridge west of Svatove. And once they lose that, they cannot just retreat into the town. They need to move further than that. There aren't that many ridges left, but there is now evidence and satellite imagery of defensive positions being prepared on the ridge east of Svatove. We know that they've blown the bridges, some of the bridges across the river that runs in this river valley. And so they really need to hold it, because if they lose this ridge and then they lose the next ridge, which is kind of the one between Svatove and Miski, what that means is that cities, like you mentioned, and Rubishne are under not only Ukrainian observation, but of course under Ukrainian fire control. So it's not just the idea that they can hit it; it's the idea that they can see it and hit it. So that leaves the Russians in those positions in sort of a pot down in the river valley. So it's that's one of the reasons why it's such a desperate fight for the Russians to hold on to the ridge west of Svatove. And that's also why they're trying to chaotically and rapidly, as quickly as they can, build any kind of fortifications to the next ridge, because if they've lost that one as well, the next terrain feature is basically at Starobilsk, or at least into 155 range of Starobilsk, all the way to the east. And it makes all the positions south on the Svetsky Donets River, like Rubizhne, completely untenable. So the Russians are in a real pickle here. It's going to be really tough for them, especially holding it with conscripts. They've got, based on the current situation, they've got about 400 meters to go in some cases before they fall off that ridge, and they're back into the valley, and then they need to go pretty far to get to the next terrain feature. So it's kind of a lot of military stuff there, but hopefully that makes sense without the visuals.
Charles, would it be fair to say that if that happens, they would be balancing on the tip of a Toblerone, metaphorically speaking?
Well, they've been building a lot of them to the east of Svatove. But yeah, they would be. I think there was some speculation looking at the terrain that there may be a left flank maneuver to the north because of the terrain. That doesn't seem to be something the Ukrainians wanted to do. We talk about the 66 highway. I mean, that has been basically a cut for a very long time. That's not really the main issue. But yeah, so it's yeah, they're stuck on a precipice basically. The only terrain advantage that they would have trying to descend that ridge would be that the slopes of these ridges are wooded, and they also have draws in them and spurs, which makes mobility a bit more constricted as you try to get down from the flat top of the ridge, the open fields, into the river valley. And then, of course, for the Ukrainians, there will be the question of how do they cross the river, especially if it's overwatched. And overwatch in this case doesn't necessarily mean direct fire, within 600 meters by them being in the town, but also just within observation range and mortar artillery range. So it will be a question there. I would love to see that they could have some kind of breakthrough, get across the river and at least make penetration on that on those fortified positions before the Russians can even effectively occupy them. But we'll see.
Thanks, Charles. So around Bakhmut, we've seen a line that's a line of contact that's developed. Has been there for 9 months. But it's, judging by recent maps, it's particularly heavy around the southeast region. What kind of strategy do you think that the Muscovite forces are trying to employ here? It's but it's coming up to winter, but the ground hasn't frozen yet. What exactly are they doing in launching these attacks in this particular direction day after day?
Yeah, on that one, your guess is as good as mine. So I understand why they want Bakhmut, and I also understand why they want the ridge line west of Bakhmut, because after that, then it starts to get really flat, and it starts to become much more maneuverable if you had the force to exploit it. So I can understand why they want Bakhmut. That makes sense to me, but why they would want it at the cost that they're trying to take it and the way that they're trying to take it, I think that goes more into the political realm with Wagner, with whatever kind of commanders they have there and what they're trying to personally achieve. Because from a military standpoint, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and they haven't been especially creative in that area of operation. In terms of the exact tactical situation, it's very difficult for me to tell. Of course, I mean we're talking now into hundreds of meters, which is too detailed for someone sitting so far away.
All right. It's great to see Colby up here. Welcome, Colby. Colby, mic check.
Hey, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you.
Colby, what's been of particular interest to you over the last 24 hours?
Well, today, Reuters is reporting that Boeing has delivered to the Pentagon a proposal to arm Ukraine with their ground-launched small diameter bomb. I will throw a tweet into the nest, so for those that haven't heard about this, they can see what we're talking about. So about a month ago, actually exactly a month ago, October 28th, the CEO of Saab in Sweden, who co-developed this munition with Boeing, announced that they expect to receive contracts for this imminently, and signaling it's more or less ready to go into production. And today we have this reporting from Reuters, who saying that they've seen documents of the proposal and spoke to a number of different people who confirm that this has made its way to the Pentagon, and that this could be delivered to Ukraine by next spring, potentially. And about a week ago, DEFMON highlighted the original reporting from Saab and put together a very good map, which I've included, illustrating what this means for Ukraine in terms of the range of this munition, because it's considerably longer than the current Ukrainian inventory of Gimler's rockets. And I highlighted the fact because it had also been announced that Turkey had provided MLRS with the same range, 150 kilometers, which seems to be a bit of a magic number because in addition to the ground-launched small diameter bomb having a range of 150 kilometers, the Gimler's ER, which is also supposed to go into production soon, also has that range. And of course, the Turks are claiming that their guided rocket also has that range. So they all seem to be in competition for business for guided rockets. They've all developed a product with that same range, trying to compete with each other. And it seems that Ukraine may be getting or could get another munition with that same range. And the interesting thing about this in particular, though, and the way they built this is the small diameter bomb is an air-launched precision guided munition. It's dropped by aircraft, and they have created this ground-launched version by taking that munition and then strapping that to old M26 MRL rockets, which are unguided. These are the original rockets that were produced for M270 and HIMARS. They've all been phased out of American service in favor of the Gimlers, which is the guided version. And the original ones also had cluster munitions, which the United States is not using anymore. So they removed that cluster warhead, but they're keeping the rocket body. Those are still in stock. And then they take that, put the small diameter bomb to it, launch it out of an M270 or a HIMARS, and then it starts on a ballistic trajectory, but then it's a glide vehicle. So like it deploys wings, and then it can glide and navigate to target mid-flight, so it doesn't actually follow a ballistic trajectory, and that enables it to do all sorts of very creative things with hitting targets that would be otherwise inaccessible to munitions that are following a ballistic trajectory. So it can hit things that are behind significant terrain features and maneuver in theoretically in more restricted urban environments to hit things that are behind buildings and do all sorts of very innovative things. So quite a capable munition that Ukraine could potentially receive, and give it a lot more firepower in the long-range envelope to hit targets that are currently, for the most part, inaccessible. Aside from the fact that the Turks are saying that their weapon system, which is reportedly in Ukraine, does have this range as well, but this has a pretty good payload and certainly very accurate as well, more accurate than Gimler's, and opened up a lot of targets and potential for the GBU small diameter bomb also has been pretty effective at penetration as well. So hitting hardened bunkers and things like that, it can destroy targets. It'd be very useful for things of that nature. Hitting to the extent that the Russians have hardened bunkers for aircraft and air bases and things like that, it's a good munition to destroy such targets.
It's more accurate than Gimler's. That takes some beating, Colby.
Yeah, Gimler's is pretty accurate already, but I believe this is advertised as accurate within about a meter or so, so quite precise.
Well, those strikes on the Antonescu Bridge were pretty precise. Thank you, Colby, for bringing us that incredible tranche of information there. Charles.
Yeah, I actually have a question for Colby. It's great to see you on the space, Colby, at this time. I know you're underway, but the smoking accidents continue in Russia. I think the latest one that I saw was actually at a gas terminal up in the Western Siberia gas fields. Long way away from Ukraine. Just wondering if you had any thoughts or any information on any of these smoking accidents.
Yeah, I did see that one. I don't have any further information to say, other than we continue to see a lot of random fires all over Russia, happening far away. Some very far into Siberia and beyond. Yeah, I mean, occupational health and safety very in Russia, but I mean, aside from these fires, it's weapon systems like this and others that Ukraine very much needs are critical, so that Ukraine does not have to just rely on these random accidents to hit targets deeper within Russian territory. They need kinetic means to reach out and hit things, valuable strategic targets within Russia itself, because relying on the smoking accidents alone is not going to do the trick.
Charles, did that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I just I know he keeps his eye on this, and so every time I see one, I always want to ask him about it because I love them.
I think we all do. Gunther.
Hey, Colby, I had some questions. What is the speed of these weapons when they're on their glide path? Are they susceptible to anti-aircraft fire? And is it the idea is that you pre-program in your flight path and all the parameters beforehand, and it sort of basically follows the waypoints to where it needs to go?
Yeah, it's GPS and INS guidance, if I understand correctly, is how it's navigating. And I don't know the top speed in the terminal phase off the top of my head. I can go check the data sheet I have on my computer and see if they have released that information publicly. But we were talking, John and CJ, myself, about it, and CJ was saying that it's quite precise and quite fast, and not at all easy to potentially intercept this compared to a HIMARS. So I think it comes down. It comes down as well, or can come down pretty much vertical, like Gimler's rockets or TACMs would be, quite fast, and that helps achieve the penetration effect as well. You can have I think you can have like a penetrator warhead and penetration timed fuse on it, and so I wouldn't suspect that it would be very easy for the Russians to intercept this compared to Gimler's. That's what I got from talking to CJ.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome up into the co-host seat, Mockers. Wonderful to see you. How are you doing? I might have been speaking to a... Mockers, welcome. Unless I was speaking into a muted mic. Mockers, give us a mic check.
Sorry, fellas. I got a phone call just as you started speaking, and it knocked all my sound off. So yeah, sorry about that. I don't know if you asked me anything. Did you ask me anything?
I was just saying, good evening, really. I was wondering, do you have that issue where you receive a phone call and then the audio on the space is just stuck at a really low level?
No, it just disappeared completely, and I was like, oh, what am I missing?
Well, it's great to see you up here, Mockers. What have you found interesting in the last 24 hours?
Well, I do have a couple of interesting things. The reason I originally put my hand up when we were talking before, when Charles mentioned partisan activity in Russia. Now, it's something I've been trying to have a little look at every so often. And I'll be honest, they're not very connected. They're not terribly organised. They seem to be very small groups or individuals and not much else. Not a massive amount, put it that way. I don't see a great deal of, organised or organisation within partisans in Russia. However, I do have a little theory, and I don't know whether it would be even worth considering, but they deported an awful lot of Ukrainians to Russia. And I'm beginning to wonder if that was a good idea.
Yeah, there's certainly many people within that country, the one that lies east of Ukraine, who are particularly unhappy with the actions of its government, and rightly so. And they know what to do. They need to take down the infrastructure and the buildings that represent the metropole, that being Moscow. In every town and city and village, wherever they live, and to ensure that the structures of power that are in place are destroyed, and the infrastructure which keeps this war machine of a country, which is of course losing the war it started, that it can be dismantled and destroyed as soon as possible. So like you, Mockers, I love to hear stories about partisan activity over there.
Well, yes, I see, bits and bobs going on. In the partisan channels, they only tend to report small actions, shall we say, but more recently they have been claiming sort of like an attack on all the vehicles in a particular police station and things like that. So, I mean, I see a little bit of something more than posters being put up, put it that way, but nothing massive that I can see being organised or arranged amongst those people in particular.
Yeah, taking out a railway track is definitely preferable to a poster, and much more effective at saving Ukrainian lives and the lives of the people that currently live within the Muscovy, because as we know, they're getting mobilized en masse, and it's not stopping. People from all walks of civilian life are just being thrown into this meat grinder around places like Pavlivka and Bakhmut. So Bernarda's here with his hand up. Good to see you, Bernarda. How are you doing?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm doing great. I just had a nice Borscht and had a nice birthday of my friend who is Ukrainian descendant. So great evening. And we were talking about people who are not happy, who are really unhappy. And I've heard about some Mobics which are not really happy and settling locations of headquarters and confirming strikes on headquarters and maybe having directing fire against headquarters from Wagner and from the Chechens. Sounds really interesting. Have you heard anything about it?
I have actually. The Georgia Legion have mentioned this a couple of days ago and again today, that basically the newly mobilised, the lowest of the low, are so hacked off with their officers, they've been selling out their locations, which are obviously further back in the line. And the officers, in the same vein, dislike the Kadrovites so much that they apparently appear to have been selling out their locations to the Ukrainian armed forces. So I don't know if this is a tactic that, normal army would employ to dismantle themselves from within, but I like it. I think it's a good idea.
I think if you remember, the Kadyrov were shooting at the Mobics if they wanted to retreat. So the circle is basically closed. They could fight each other and doesn't even need to invade Ukraine.
That's a very good point. That yeah, I mean, if they just go home and fight each other, that's perfectly acceptable. I think that's a good idea. In fact, I have a little story from one of the areas where the mobilized have been taken within Russia. They were taken to, and let me just find it. Here we go. Serpukov, maybe in Russia, and the special Kherson Cat has put up a video of them quite clearly looting alcohol from the shops. So, continuing in a fine tradition there by the sounds of things.
That sounds interesting. I heard actually another fact, and I saw a video of basically supplies for the Mobics, which somehow stayed behind the front lines and were are really close to headquarters in some kind of storage units or how you would call it. But canned meat, canned pork, bread, what you can imagine, what people need to survive. Everything was stored away in a kind of mud puddle. It was really nasty. I don't know. which idea this was, but I don't know if they had the idea to sell it to someone or something like this. But yeah, it's always amazing if you can watch the Russian army fighting itself from the inside. I think it's that's the kind of yeah, content I really wish to see more from.
Yes, I don't know if you noticed, but that video of all the food and supplies, they were complaining because it had been piled up in this area and it was basically just left for the mice, and the mice were
Yes, yes.
eating it while they were starving.
Yeah. So I mean, I would understand it if they had the idea, oh, let's just steal the stuff, don't give it to the Mobics, they will die anyways tomorrow, and let's sell it. But they just let it rot, and yeah, this is another great example how Russia really shows how much is alive grows in Russia, and yeah, the mice is more worse than alive in Russia, it seems to be.
Well, the mice can look after themselves, that's what it is.
Absolutely. Looks like this.
Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I actually had a slightly different topic, but I kind of a topic for Bionade. So I opened the paper this morning, Bionade. I'm here in southern Germany, and
Oh yeah.
there's a wonderful article that basically translates to that Putin has underestimated the willingness to help. That's the translation of the article, and it's with an immigration expert in the region, talking about how well the support for the refugees and the integration for the refugees has been going. And I mean, this is something I've seen firsthand, and it's obviously this is a long topic in Germany in terms of refugees, but I it's going very well, at least where I live. Is it the same where you are, and getting the same messages?
Charles, I mean, I've seen the numbers from the Statistisches Bundesamt, and yeah, it was really amazing. So I think more than a quarter of the people who are able to work, which are refugees in Germany from Ukraine, already have yeah, a work which is social security yeah, based. So they pay their own health insurance and pay into the system in Germany, and paying into the rent system and in the pension system and everything, and are basically working here as like they are full citizens, and that's really amazing. But another point, I was driving home yesterday from Hamburg, and in my city there is a small Christmas market directly in front of the central station, and there are two small yeah, two small shops where you can buy Glühwein and yeah, sausages and everything. And there are two extra small yeah, so two other small shops where you can buy borscht and vareniki and many Ukrainian things. And I was there and I was like, oh, and the point which brought my attention to it was there was a journalist, American, I think American or British journalist, which is working in Germany as a correspondent. And he was there on this Christmas market and was like, I've seen this here, I've eaten Varenki, it was everything okay. And then some French people were walking besides me and were like, if I hear the topic Ukraine again, it annoys me so much, and something like this. And I was yesterday there because I saw the post and I thought, oh, it's in my city. I have to go there. I'm at the central station anyways. Eat a borscht and drank beer and Goreljka, and it was really nice. So, and today I met someone there and had again a nice borscht, and we had a nice conversation with the people which are working there, and they told us what kind of projects they do. They make workshops I think every Sunday for the whole afternoon. They're making dancing classes. You can, build Ukrainian like small teddy bears and puppets and something like this, and everything. So really, that's how you want to see integration. Yeah, it's really amazing, and these are people which had normal jobs, and now they're in Germany. They were refugees and said, okay, let's start this shop. Let's make some food. Let's make some cultural exchange, and it worked really well and nice. And we talked to her, and she said, I've seen the story from this journalist who said we were here and someone was walking and was saying something bad about Ukraine. And she said, this did not happen. This did not happen. This really did not happen. I did not notice this. I did not notice that anyone was here and had any bad intentions. We talked with them like for an hour, and yeah, we we said, okay, at least once a week we will meet here and have a nice conversation and a nice exchange, and maybe yeah, take part on the workshops and everything. And yeah, I mean that's really interesting if you really talk to the people